The chandeliers glittered like stars above the ballroom, their crystals refracting light into 1,000 tiny rainbows that shimmered across the marble floor. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume, a mixture of wealth and indulgence that clung to every surface. Guests moved like waves in the grand hall, women in flowing gowns of satin and silk, brushing shoulders with men in sharp tuxedos, glasses of champagne catching the light as laughter echoed under the high ceiling. A string quartet played softly from the corner, their music providing the rhythm to the evening's carefully choreographed elegance. In the midst of all this grandeur, Marcus moved quietly, a tray balanced effortlessly in his hand. His suit was simple, his white shirt crisp, his bow tie neatly tied. He walked with a posture that was almost regal, though most did not notice. To the glittering crowd, he was part of the scenery, like the waiters who appeared only when glasses emptied or plates needed clearing. His presence was functional, not human in their eyes. Yet, if anyone had looked closer, they would have seen something different in Marcus, an ease in his smile, a calm in his eyes, as though he knew a truth the others did not. He offered drinks with polite nods, never faltering in his warmth, even when ignored. One guest took a flute from his tray without a glance. Another waved him away with the flick of a manicured hand, and still he moved on, steady, unbothered. Occasionally, his gaze lingered on the large stage at the front of the hall, where a podium had been set up, waiting for the evening's speeches. His expression was unreadable, but in his silence, there was intention. As Marcus circled the room, the conversations of the wealthy rose around him like a tide. Deals were whispered over cocktails, vacations to the south of France casually mentioned, and compliments exchanged with the easy arrogance of those who lived untouched by struggle. In one corner, a woman laughed too loudly at a joke about stock prices, while nearby, a man in diamond cufflinks boasted about his art collection. Marcus listened without listening, hearing their words, but filtering them through a deeper patience. He had heard such things before. The evening glittered, polished to perfection. Yet beneath the surface, cracks of vanity and pride were visible to anyone who cared to look. Marcus saw them, though he betrayed nothing. He continued his rounds, passing between the clusters of elites, a quiet figure carrying more dignity than many of those he served. It was here, in this world of grandeur and excess, that the first spark of cruelty would strike. But for now, the night hummed with music and laughter, and Marcus remained the invisible thread weaving among the powerful, waiting for the moment when everything would change. Eleanor Whitmore entered the ballroom with the kind of confidence that demanded attention. She was tall, her figure draped in a gown of shimmering emerald silk that caught the light with every step. Diamonds hung from her ears, and her laugh was loud, a sharp note above the gentle murmur of the room. People turned their heads as she passed, some eager to greet her, others careful to stay on her good side. Eleanor thrived on the gaze of others. She drank it in as though it were fine wine. She was surrounded by her circle of admirers, a small group of equally wealthy socialites who hovered like satellites around her bright but unforgiving sun. They listened when she spoke, they laughed when she mocked, and they followed her lead because Eleanor's approval could mean social doors opened or slammed shut. She was known for her tongue, sharper than the diamond bracelet on her wrist, and she used it freely. Marcus, still carrying his tray with quiet poise, approached her group. His presence was subtle, his steps smooth, his posture straight. With practiced grace, he held out the tray of champagne flutes, offering without intrusion. Most in the circle barely looked at him. A few plucked glasses without breaking their conversations. But Eleanor's eyes landed on him, and her smile curved, not with kindness, but with the thrill of opportunity. "Well," she said in a voice loud enough to carry to those nearby, "isn't this fascinating? Our waiter looks so dignified, like he's forgotten he's here to serve." Her companions tittered, some awkwardly, others with unguarded laughter. Eleanor tilted her head, studying Marcus as if he were a curiosity in a museum. "Tell me, do you always stand so straight when carrying drinks? Or is this part of your performance?" Her tone dripped with mockery, and her words cut sharper than they appeared, designed to remind him of his place. Marcus did not flinch. His hand remained steady, the tray balanced perfectly, his face calm. He met her gaze for the briefest moment, not with defiance, but with a quiet strength that unsettled those who noticed it. He then offered the tray closer, his voice steady and polite. "Champagne, madam?" Eleanor blinked at his composure, then let out a laugh, tossing her hair back so the diamonds at her ears caught the light. "Oh, marvelous. Even his voice has that polished tone. You must practice it in the mirror before coming here." Her friends chuckled obediently. The sting of her words hung in the air, meant to reduce him, to put him back in the invisible box where she believed he belonged. Around them a few guests glanced over, sensing the cruelty, but none stepped forward. It was easier to look away, easier to let the moment pass. Only one older man near the edge of the circle raised an eyebrow, his lips pressing into a thin line, as though he recognized the ugliness beneath Eleanor's laughter. Marcus remained still, offering the tray until it was clear no one else wanted a glass. Then, with the same calm dignity as before, he gave a small nod and walked on, leaving Eleanor with her laughter echoing in the space he had vacated. But for all her mockery, something in her smile wavered. His lack of reaction unsettled her, though she quickly brushed it aside. To her, he was just a waiter, nothing more. What she didn't know was that the very man she had just ridiculed would soon stand at the center of the room, commanding more attention than she could ever imagine. The evening pressed forward, the air growing heavier with perfume and chatter as the charity ball reached its height. The string quartet shifted to a livelier piece, and the dance floor began to fill with couples, gowns swirling in tuxedos, gliding in practiced rhythm. Waiters moved silently among the crowd, trays raised high, the clinking of crystal mingling with the music. Marcus continued his quiet path, his steady presence weaving through the room like a shadow with purpose. Yet whispers began to spread. It started softly, curious glances exchanged between two board members, a hushed comment from a woman in pearls. Near the stage, event coordinators in black suits moved briskly, consulting small clipboards, adjusting microphones, and gesturing toward the podium. A subtle air of anticipation took hold, rippling through the golden hall like a tide. Eleanor, resplendent in emerald, noticed the change. She narrowed her eyes slightly, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping against her champagne glass. Something was happening, something she had not been told. Her circle of admirers continued their shallow chatter, but she leaned slightly forward, straining to catch fragments of murmured conversations around her. "Important announcement?" one guest whispered. "The host will finally make his entrance," another said with excitement. "They've kept him hidden until now." Quite the grand reveal. Eleanor's brows arched. She prided herself on always being in the know, always privy to the inner workings of high society. The idea that someone of importance had been concealed from her irked her pride. Who could this mysterious host be? Why would they choose such a dramatic unveiling? Across the ballroom, Marcus paused briefly in his stride, his eyes flicking toward the stage. His expression remained calm, but within him a current of thought stirred. The time was drawing near, the veil of anonymity he had worn all evening soon to fall away. He placed his tray on a nearby stand, excused himself silently from the flow of the waitstaff, and moved with quiet assurance toward the edge of the hall. No one paid him much attention, no one except an elderly woman seated near the back, who watched him with a knowing smile, as though she carried a secret alongside him. Meanwhile, Eleanor turned to her companions, her laughter just a little forced. "Well, whoever this mysterious benefactor is, I do hope he has more style than the rest of this crowd. You'd think with all this wealth, someone could offer us a surprise worth remembering." Her words carried just enough volume to draw approving chuckles from those near her, though a few shifted uncomfortably, sensing the edge beneath her tone. The murmur in the room grew stronger. A man in a dark suit approached the stage, tested the microphone, and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Tonight we are honored beyond words to introduce the very individual whose generosity has made this extraordinary evening possible. He has chosen to remain in the background until now, quietly observing, ensuring everything was as it should be. But it is time for him to step forward. The room stilled, the crowd turning as one toward the podium. Eleanor leaned forward eagerly, her eyes sharp with curiosity. She whispered to her neighbor, "Whoever it is, they'd better live up to this ridiculous build-up." Her smirk returned, unaware that her cruel laughter earlier in the evening would soon come back to haunt her. Marcus, unseen at that moment, exhaled slowly. The world of glittering chandeliers and polished arrogance was about to see him not as a shadow, not as a servant, but as something far greater. A hush fell over the grand ballroom as the announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. All conversations stilled, laughter faded, and even the clinking of champagne glasses ceased. The chandeliers overhead gleamed brighter somehow, their golden lights spilling across faces filled with anticipation. Everyone leaned toward the stage, waiting for the host who had, until now, remained an enigma. Eleanor's emerald dress shimmered as she shifted impatiently, her chin raised in an almost regal pose. Her eyes darted from the stage to the crowd, hoping to catch a hint of movement that would reveal this unseen benefactor. Around her, her companions whispered with excitement, some daring to speculate aloud: a famous philanthropist, a billionaire investor, a celebrity with ties to the city. Eleanor smirked and muttered, "Watch it be some dreary old man with a checkbook and no personality. All this drama for nothing." But then a movement at the far side of the hall caught her attention. A tall figure stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, not from the wings of the stage, but from among the very people who had been serving the guests all evening. Marcus walked with a measured calm, his black suit perfectly tailored, his bow tie neat, and his polished shoes catching the light. His presence was no longer that of a waiter, weaving silently among elites. He moved with purpose, with the kind of authority that filled the space before he even reached the podium. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. A woman near the front dropped her fan, and a man whispered hoarsely, "That's him? That's the host?" The murmur spread like wildfire until it reached Eleanor's ears. She blinked once, then twice, her painted smile faltering as recognition struck her. This was the very man she had mocked just moments ago, the one she had belittled in front of her friends. Marcus mounted the stage with grace, his expression steady, his eyes scanning the room. For the first time that night, the crowd truly looked at him, not as someone invisible, not as a servant whose presence was taken for granted, but as a man standing in full authority. He paused at the podium, adjusted the microphone slightly, and allowed the silence to deepen until it demanded his voice. "Good evening," he began, his tone warm yet commanding, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. This event is not only a celebration of generosity, but a reminder of what we are capable of when we come together. Not just in wealth, but in spirit and in compassion." His words fell like a gentle tide over the crowd, drawing them closer with every sentence. Eleanor's face burned, though she forced her lips into a fixed smile as if she could mask her shock. Her friends shifted uncomfortably around her, some sneaking glances at her, others focusing on Marcus, as though trying to erase the memory of her earlier cruelty. Marcus continued, "I chose to remain unseen at first, because I wanted to observe, not the glittering gowns or the diamonds, but the hearts in this room. Tonight is not about titles or appearances. It is about the impact we make on others' lives. Every glass of champagne, every ticket purchased, every moment spent here contributes to something far greater than ourselves." The audience was transfixed. He spoke not with arrogance, but with a sincerity that disarmed the most skeptical listeners. The man Eleanor had tried to reduce to a caricature now commanded respect with every word. The irony pressed heavily on her chest. She shifted uncomfortably, her earlier laughter now a bitter echo in her memory. Applause erupted as Marcus paused, a wave of clapping hands and nodding heads surging through the hall. Eleanor's palms itched, her pride urging her not to clap, but the pressure of the moment forced her to bring her hands together slowly, the sound hollow, reluctant. Inside, her confidence trembled for the first time in years. She had built her identity on the power to diminish others, and now she found herself diminished, though no one had spoken a single word against her. and Marcus, without even looking in her direction, had already begun her undoing. The ballroom pulsed with a new kind of energy after Marcus's opening speech. The crowd that had once glanced past him now leaned in, captivated by his presence. Servers in white gloves moved quietly between the tables, but the attention of the wealthy was no longer on their champagne. It was on the man who had stepped out of obscurity and into undeniable authority. The soft hum of the string quartet had resumed, but even their music felt like it belonged to Marcus now, as though the entire room bent to his rhythm. Eleanor sat rigid at her table, her glass of champagne untouched. The emerald fabric of her gown clung to her skin, suddenly too heavy, too stifling. Her companions whispered to one another in awe, exchanging theories about Marcus's wealth, his connections, his story. A friend leaned close to Eleanor and murmured, "You spoke to him earlier, didn't you? You must have noticed something." The words stung, carrying an unspoken reminder of her mocking tone, her cruel laugh. Eleanor forced a brittle smile. "Of course," she lied. "I knew there was something about him." Yet inside, she felt the walls closing in, her earlier arrogance transforming into a sour pit of dread. On stage, Marcus introduced the cause behind the evening, a foundation dedicated to funding scholarships for underprivileged youth, particularly those from communities overlooked and underserved. He spoke of young artists who dreamed of studios, engineers who sketched inventions on scraps of paper, doctors who studied under dim lights because they could not afford proper tools. His words painted vivid pictures of lives brimming with potential, waiting only for a chance to flourish. As he spoke, a large screen illuminated behind him, showcasing photos and short clips of students whose lives had already been touched by the foundation. Smiling children clutching books, a teenager proudly holding a letter of acceptance to a prestigious university, a young woman in scrubs standing at the threshold of her medical school. The audience softened visibly, their faces glowing with admiration and inspiration. Even those who had entered the evening with skepticism found their hearts stirred. Eleanor felt a cold sweat bead at the nape of her neck. She remembered her own words, mocking his suit, belittling his presence, reducing him to nothing more than a servant to amuse her circle. Now, with every revelation of his generosity, her cruelty was magnified. The contrast between them was unbearable, his quiet dignity versus her shallow vanity. Around her, applause broke out, louder than before, echoing against the marble walls. She joined reluctantly, her palms stinging as she clapped, the sound a punishment she could not escape. Then Marcus did something that made Eleanor's heart lurch. He stepped down from the stage and began walking among the guests as he spoke. He no longer stood apart, but wove himself into the crowd, placing a hand on a guest's shoulder, pausing to greet someone with warmth, bending slightly to meet others at eye level. He was not a figure above them. He was a leader among them. His humility disarmed, his kindness uplifted. Wherever he walked, admiration followed like a tide. As he approached Eleanor's table, she felt her breath catch. Her pulse raced, her throat tightened. She shifted in her seat, desperately searching for composure. Marcus's eyes swept across the group, landing briefly on hers. For an instant, she thought he might expose her in front of everyone, that he might recount her cruel laughter, her condescension. But he didn't. Instead, he offered the group a calm smile and a gentle nod before moving on, his grace a sharper rebuke than any accusation could have been. That small act, his refusal to humiliate her as she had humiliated him, burned Eleanor more deeply than public shame. For the first time in her life, she felt dwarfed not by wealth, beauty, or influence, but by character. She sat frozen, her pride unraveling thread by thread, her laughter from earlier replaying in her mind like a haunting echo. The applause followed Marcus as he walked back toward the stage, stronger now, unified, rising to a standing ovation. Eleanor remained seated, her hands trembling against her lap, her carefully crafted image collapsing in silence. She could not escape the truth that hung in the air. She had revealed her pettiness, and he had revealed his greatness. The night deepened, and the charity ball had reached its most dazzling moment. A live auction began. the room alight with anticipation as priceless art, luxury trips, and rare jewels were paraded across the stage. The wealthy guests lifted their paddles with ease, each bid higher than the last, as though money were nothing more than numbers without consequence. Yet the rhythm of the evening had changed. What had once been arrogance was now admiration, directed not at the auctioneer or the prizes, but at Marcus, who stood near the stage, his calm presence guiding the energy of the room. The auctioneer, a silver-haired man with a booming voice, paused before introducing the final item. The lights dimmed slightly, and with a flourish, a velvet-covered pedestal was wheeled to the center of the stage. When the cloth was lifted, it revealed an ornate jewelry collection, each piece glittering under the chandeliers. Gasps rippled through the audience. The auctioneer declared it the most valuable set of the night, a donation from an anonymous benefactor. As the bidding began, the numbers rose quickly. Wealthy patrons called out figures with pride, each one attempting to outdo the last. Eleanor sat at her table, her hands clasped tightly together. She wanted to bid, wanted to show she could still command attention, but the shame pressing against her chest rendered her silent. Her earlier cruelty clashed violently with the generosity now displayed by others, and she felt the weight of every whisper around her. Then, as the numbers reached heights few could match, Marcus raised his hand. The room fell instantly silent. The auctioneer, momentarily stunned, repeated the figure Marcus had offered, a sum so staggering it eclipsed all prior bids. Murmurs swept through the crowd, disbelief mixing with awe. Who was this man who had been serving champagne only an hour before, now outbidding the wealthiest in the room with quiet authority? The auctioneer, regaining his composure, searched the room for another paddle, but none rose. No one dared challenge Marcus. The gavel struck with a decisive thud, and the collection was his. Applause erupted, thunderous and unrestrained, the sound echoing through the grand hall like a wave. Guests rose to their feet, clapping with fervor, some even cheering. But Marcus did not keep the jewels. Instead, he stepped forward and addressed the audience once more. His voice was steady, rich with conviction. "This collection," he said, "is not mine to wear or lock away. Tonight it belongs to the cause we are here to serve. Every stone will be auctioned piece by piece in smaller events, so that more hearts may be touched, more lives uplifted." His words carried like fire, igniting something deep within the crowd. What had begun as a glittering show of wealth had transformed into a testament of generosity and purpose. Eleanor felt her throat tighten, her eyes burning. She realized in that moment that Marcus's power did not lie in wealth alone, though he clearly had it. His power was in his ability to turn wealth into light, to shift vanity into vision, to transform the shallow gestures of the elite into meaningful change. He stood as proof that dignity, kindness, and strength of character were worth more than any jewel in the room. As applause shook the marble walls, Eleanor sank further into her chair, consumed by regret. Around her, guests were no longer whispering about her cutting remark or her mocking laugh. They were speaking Marcus's name with reverence, their admiration undeniable. She had sought to belittle him, and in doing so had revealed the smallness of her own heart. He, in turn, had risen higher than she or anyone else could have imagined. The ovation lasted long after Marcus had stepped off the stage, leaving Eleanor to confront the wreckage of her pride beneath the glow of chandeliers that now seemed far too harsh. As the last notes of the quartet's music drifted into silence, the atmosphere in the ballroom was utterly transformed. What had begun as a night of vanity and thinly veiled competition among the wealthy had become something entirely different, a moment of reckoning, humility, and inspiration. Marcus had stepped down from the stage, but his presence still dominated the room, commanding respect without demanding it. People whispered his name as though they were in the presence of a legend, their faces softened by awe. The guests, many of whom had entered the evening with little concern for anything beyond their reputations and fortunes, now found themselves stirred to reflection. They approached Marcus in small groups, offering their gratitude and pledging larger donations to the charity than they had ever before considered. Men who had strutted earlier with arrogance now spoke to him with deference, and women who had once dismissed him as invisible gazed at him with admiration, as though seeing a truth that had been hidden in plain sight all along. Eleanor sat frozen, her champagne untouched, the weight of her own actions pressing down like an anchor. Hours earlier, she had smirked and humiliated him with a careless cruelty, blinded by her sense of superiority. Now she was the one invisible, her grandeur eclipsed by his quiet power. The sting of shame burned her cheeks as she watched him shake hands, his kindness untainted by bitterness. She wondered if he even remembered her insult, or if it had been too small to matter in his world of greater purpose. That possibility humbled her more than anything. At one point, Marcus crossed the room, and Eleanor's heart stopped. Their eyes met for the first time since her mocking laugh. She opened her mouth to apologize, but no words came. All she saw in his gaze was calmness. No anger, no vindication, simply the unshakable dignity of a man who did not need to tear others down to rise. He nodded to her, a gesture that was at once merciful and devastating, before moving on. That single moment would haunt her far longer than her own words had lingered in the air. As the night drew to its close, the applause and admiration showed no sign of fading. The master of ceremonies returned to the stage and announced in a voice full of reverence that the event had raised more money than in any year prior. The success was credited directly to Marcus's generosity and vision. A spontaneous chant began from the crowd, echoing through the hall. For the children, for the cause. Guests raised their glasses, not to themselves, but to something larger. Marcus stood near the exit, watching quietly, his tray of glasses long forgotten. He was no longer seen as a waiter, but as the very soul of the evening. His calm smile reflected neither pride nor triumph, only the satisfaction of knowing lives would be changed by what had been accomplished. Outside, the night air was cool, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Marcus finally stepped away from the glittering hall, his figure illuminated briefly by the glow spilling from the tall windows. Behind him, laughter, applause, and music still carried through the air, yet ahead of him stretched a quiet street, lined with shadows and possibility. He walked with the same measured grace he had carried all night, knowing the true victory was not the stunned silence of those who once mocked him, but the lasting good that would ripple far beyond the marble walls. For Eleanor and others like her, the night would be remembered as the evening their illusions shattered. For Marcus, it was just another step in a life defined not by wealth or power, but by purpose.